A warm welcome to you all. It's lovely to see everyone. I'm Anthony Barnes. I'm a NICEC Fellow, and I have a special interest in quiz education in primary and secondary schools. This seminar is in honour of Lyn Barham, who is retiring from NICEC. This was her last meeting today, but I'll say more about Lyn at the end. Little bit on digital housekeeping. Thank you to Michael and Claire and Jill for dealing with all things Zoom, getting it all sorted. If you'd like to make comments, if you've got any resources that you think others would like to know about, any questions that you've got, pop them in the chat. We're going to publish the recording on the NICEC website, together with a sort of note about the meeting with some references and book list type things. So we'll try and capture what's in the chat as well. The programme, very briefly, is we're going to have 4 short presentations. Tristram Hooley, who's a NICEC Fellow and wearer of many hats, mostly green, I would suspect, and you may be familiar with him if you're a regular visitor to his Adventures in Career Development blog. He's going to make his input via YouTube because he's in transit somewhere between here and Norway. But if he can at all pop into the meeting, he's going to. So we'll look out for that. So I'm standing in his chair for him. So that's why. Welcome to so Tristram first, then Jay, if you're right, going next. Jay, you probably want to introduce yourself a bit more, but co-director of climate campaigns at People and Planet, which is a student-led organisation campaigning for social and environmental justice. And I'm sure, again, many of you are familiar with the People and Planet's University League rankings. Quite shocking to see which universities failed their degrees, their green degrees this year. Some quite prestigious ones, actually. But we look forward to that. And then we'll have Rita and Miriam from Denmark, who've just contributed chapters or articles to a new volume on green career guidance and sustainability in Denmark. So I look forward to hearing more about that. And just in passing, saying that there was a survey this week about the greenest countries in the world, and Sweden was first, Denmark was second, and the UK was third. I suspect we've got a long way to go in the UK. I'm not quite sure why we're up there at third, but anyway, so we'll have those inputs, so that will inspire people in the breakout room. And we thought maybe 25 minutes for, allow plenty of time for discussion. Then we'll come back for a quick plenary with a bit of feedback from each group, but I think that will be fairly brief, but hopefully we can capture flavour of some of your discussion. The rest we'll put into the report that goes on the website, and fingers crossed we can finish by 6:30. If not, that's down to me, so I'll try and keep us to time. Right, well, without more ado, can I hand over to Michael, who's going to cue in Tristram's contribution.
I'm really excited that we're doing a NICEC seminar on green guidance. I'm going to hope to be there, but I thought I'd record it just in case, so that it's there, even if I get caught up with my travel that I'm doing today. So I think it's a really interesting topic. And I think the ideas that we've got on this subject are sort of gradually growing and developing. We've got a lot of interesting stuff that we're starting to put on the Career Guidance and Social Justice website. But I think it's also worth noting that we don't really have robust theories in this area in the way that we might do in many other areas. So in this presentation, I'm going to try and offer some thoughts about how we can take this forward and really think about practice primarily. So how can we actually make this real? So climate change is the defining issue of our times. It's something that's going to affect all of our lives, is already affecting all of our lives. And, you know, we don't need to rehearse the science here, but there's very strong scientific evidence that demonstrates that climate change is happening. And so we've really got to move past this idea that this is a kind of contentious or debatable subject, really. So what does this mean? Well, I think we can say that for many people, the shift that we're seeing in the climate is going to lead to changes in their lives. So rising prices, shortages of goods, growing inequality, health issues, increasing volumes of migration, and so on. And we've heard a lot about all of these things in the recent political environment. But critically for us in careers, it's going to lead to shifts in the skills needed, the jobs available, and the nature of those jobs. And that's something that we all need to think about. So one thing I think it's important to say is climate change is an important environmental issue. Maybe it's the most important, but it's not the only one. And we also need to think about our environment more broadly. So the environment is where we live, is where we conduct our lives and work, our careers, and it's shaped by numerous small decisions made by each of us. Should we throw rubbish out of our window, for example, but also by policies and politics. So what kind of level of street cleaning does the local authority provide? These are environmental questions just as much as the climate change issues are. And I think it's also important to remember that while we might feel that we're all in it together, and certainly there's a lot of slogans and so on that talk about everybody being on the same planet and all of that sort of thing, there are also important differences in the way that this manifests for different countries and different social groups. And this picture from Sao Paulo in Brazil gives us perhaps the most stark example of this, that we can have one group of people living in a kind of nice green environment, and from the poorer people, they're living kind of in complete squalor and so on. Our environments are social environments, and they're affected by these wider social and political issues. So when we're thinking about this, we've also got to recognize that this is a political issue, and it's one which is affected by power and by influence. And what we've seen over the last 50 years is a lot of corporate players in this area, particularly people in the fossil fuels industry, exerting a lot of influence over how societies address these issues of environmental change and sustainability. And that's something that I think poses a big challenge for us as we start to think about the role that we might play in terms of how we might work with employers on this. And one of the things that we like to do in careers is to work closely with employers, but we also need to recognize that there are some tensions and challenges on doing this. One of the big influences that corporate players in the environmental discussion have had is trying to develop ideas like the individual footprint, the carbon footprint, these sorts of ideas. These are very individualistic ways of seeing the problem. So the responsibility is all placed on the individual to reduce their waste, to recycle more, to use their car less, and so on. Now, I'm not saying there's no place for this. In fact, I think it can be an important part of it. But what is very clear now is a focus on individuals making different consumer choices is insufficient. And I'm going to argue today that this is also something that we can think about in terms of the way we think about individuals making career choices as well. Where does this all lead us then? Well, what we are starting to see is the emergence of Green New Deal type initiatives in various different countries. This is a political approach led by government, which foregrounds systemic issues, but also foregrounds the politics of production. How can we organize work and the economy differently in order to reduce climate change? And this, I think, re-engages us with ideas around work and career, because it's about where we work and how we work rather than just how we consume that's being discussed. So if we accept the idea that career is about how we relate to the world around us, to the institutions, to the environment, and so on, then this places career in quite a central role. And it also means that we're talking about something much bigger than just green jobs. So we're not just talking about how do we think about what might be an environmentally sustainable job to work in and then trying to direct people towards that. We're thinking about how people's working lives interface with all of these issues that I've been talking about so far in terms of how we might shift the economy from one kind of economy which is unsustainable to a different one which is sustainable. And in people's careers, this raises quite a lot of important questions. So people need to think about moral questions. So what kind of work should they do? Do they understand the environmental implications of it and so on? But also their skills. Have they got the skills to be able to make this positive contribution into the environment? So how do career development professionals then address these issues? I think one of the things that we are keen on telling people is they have agency, they have the capacity to change their life. But when we're faced with something like the environmental crisis, this can be very challenging. So in other work, I've proposed, along with Ronald Sultana and Rhea Thompson, I've proposed this idea of the 5 signposts for a socially just career guidance: build critical consciousness, name oppression, question what's normal, encourage people to work together, work at a range of levels. So what I've done here is to try and rethink, well, what does that look like if we're thinking about this in the context of the environment? And it's about things like helping people to understand what might happen in the environment, what it might mean for their careers and the careers of others. It's about helping to see climate injustice and noticing where it's shaping our careers. It's about questioning ideas about normality and what constitutes normal life, and recognizing the fact that normal life is probably going to change. It's about helping people to see the limits of individual action, and then also as a professional to be able to work at multiple levels. So what might this sort of approach, this kind of green glasses approach to career guidance look like in the context? I'm going to talk about schools. That's the world I sort of feel most familiar with. So let's think about what that might look like. And the first thing we need to recognize is that this is not news to many young people. Lots of young people are already engaging with these issues. We can't really talk meaningfully about careers in schools without recognizing that there are lots of young people who care about this already. So how can we bring this in a meaningful way into the classroom or into a careers interview? Well, we developed the CDI framework and as a new way of setting out essentially a careers curriculum in schools. And what we've tried to do is to broaden the kinds of concerns that the careers curriculum can deal with. So it includes things like work-life balance and bigger political issues. Within that, we've got a particular highlighting of discussing the relationship between career and the environment. So we've got that in as a competency, if you like, within this set of learning outcomes that we've developed. I think we can actually think much bigger about this. So if we think about how we use the curriculum to address environmental issues in career, we might, in this grow throughout life, we might be reflecting on people's impact on the environment, challenging them to do more and challenging climate change. We might be exploring possibilities and thinking about environmental policies and the impact on occupations and sectors and so on. Think about how we might manage career differently, perhaps considering different climate change scenarios and how that might impact on your career and your career management. We might think about how environmental activists, NGOs and sustainable businesses got started, how they're resourced and operated, in that this kind of entrepreneurial competency around creating opportunities. Might look at balancing life and work and how this relates to different environmental impacts. Might discuss things like the 4-day week there, for example. And let's see the big picture and think about these interactions between climate change, the environment, policies and politics and so on. So what might this look like in practice? Well, in practice, we might have something like this. We might give students, divide students into small groups, give them a series of sectors to look at and get them to do some labour market information research. So get them to look at key companies, typical jobs, and think about how this sector impacts on the climate, and how climate change will impact on this sector. So I've sort of played around with that, given some resources and so on. But I think that's a reasonable exercise that most students would be able to do in, say, Key Stage 4, and would be able to do a bit of research and come up with some ideas. And then we need to unpack that in a follow-up discussion where we perhaps talk about some issues around how climate change is changing business. Are businesses doing enough? Is it impacting on the jobs that are likely to be available? Where can you work if you want to be green? What does it even mean to be green? And what can you do if you work for a polluting company? So I've got some resources here for you to look at if you're interested in some of this stuff. And my contact details, I've already given the Career Guidance for Social Justice one as well. But to summarize, I think climate change and wider environmental issues are becoming increasingly important for our careers. It's not meaningful to talk to people about their careers without recognizing the changing context of environmental change. A critical approach linked to a wider considerations of social justice provides us, I think, with the best framework for considering these issues as part of career management. And career education provides us an important space in which we can get individuals thinking about environmental change. And hopefully I've just given you a few ideas about how that might work out in practice. So I hope some of this has been interesting. I hope it's been gives you a few ideas, and I hope we can carry on talking about them in the seminar. Thank you.
Right, start video. Thank you very much, Tristram. And now that you're here, would people like to put any questions to Tristram in the chat, because we will need to move fairly swiftly on. But I think what you've done is you've set the scene. You've told us why this is such an important issue. It's probably a defining issue of the world at the moment. And you've also given us some very practical suggestions, while still saying that what we need is to develop our theories and our approaches to this whole issue. I'm now going to ask Jay if he'd like to give his presentation, and this is going to be very interesting for people, because as I suspect as career development professionals, we don't think of ourselves as activists and campaigners necessarily, although we have just had a CDI campaign, which was about careers being so much more than just about jobs. But I was a bit disappointed that when you saw the kind of things on social media about this campaign, green career guidance issues didn't feature hardly at all. So it's something that people will, I feel sure, Jay, would like to listen to, because they're going to have to think about how they regard activism and advocacy in their roles. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I'll just get my screen shared and then we'll kick off. Okay, is that working for everyone? I'm seeing some nods, so I'm trusting that everyone's seeing it.
Thank you.
So, yeah, my name is Jay Clarke. I'm the co-director of climate campaigns over at People and Planet. Some disclaimers: I'm not an academic. I'm not a careers professional. I am a climate organizer. I've been organizing specifically within higher education around climate issues for almost a decade now, and I've been with People and Planet for nearly 5 years. And the thing that People and Planet has kind of been most famous for, and the thing I was most involved in prior to this campaign, was fossil fuel divestment, pushing universities to withdraw their investments from fossil fuel companies. And we now stand at 101 UK universities have withdrawn their investments from fossil fuel companies. And this was very much seen as a successor campaign to that. And the campaign that I'm here to talk to you about, and I think the reason why I was invited, is this campaign, Fossil Free Careers, which some of you will have heard of. Some of you will have opinions on already. Some of you hopefully will have an opinion by the end of this presentation. and hopefully we can move the conversation forward within the careers world. So before I launch into the kind of campaign context, what is People on Planet? Well, although the network sort of renews itself every 3 years as students pass through their time at university, the organisation is over 50 years old, and it's been working on environmental and social justice for this whole time. We are the UK's largest student network campaigning on social and climate justice. Currently, we work specifically in UK universities, so in higher education in the UK, but we have historically also worked in further education and in schools, but as funding has shrunk, so is kind of our area of operations. And importantly, we are student-led, and that means two key things primarily. The first is we have a majority student trustee board, which is elected by the network. And the second is all of our campaigns are democratically developed, proposed, and selected by our network. And it is then the job of staff members like myself to go away and make those campaigns runnable, winnable, and impactful. But the starting point for all those campaigns is students themselves saying, we want this. So Tristram's presentation has done a fantastic job of kind of setting the scene, and thank you very much for that. I just want to establish 3 facts, 3 sort of ground rules really for engaging with this conversation, both here and in the breakout rooms, and hopefully they won't be controversial at all. The first one is the climate crisis is real. There is no room for denialism. There is a scientific consensus. I'd say the real world impacts are now pretty clear as well, but let's establish that as a starting point between ourselves. The second, which is slightly more challenging given some of the way that it's portrayed in media coverage, etc., is the climate crisis is not a future event. It's not something that could happen, something that is pending. It is something that is happening now, which is intimately related with the third ground rule, which is that the climate crisis is adversely affecting people right now. It is killing people, it is displacing people, and it is worsening the quality of life in significant parts of the globe now. Not that it might in the future, or it could do if we don't take action. This is happening. There are real world consequences of the climate crisis now. And that's important framing for how we engage in this conversation, because a lot of the way we talk about climate is as hypotheticals. Another fact, it's not a ground rule, it is just a fact. This is from the United Nations, a very kind of mainstream and accepted source. Fossil fuels, so specifically coal, oil, and gas, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about fossil fuels, are by far the largest contributor to climate change, what we would now call the climate crisis, accounting for over 75% of global greenhouse emissions and nearly 90% of all carbon dioxide emissions. Now, where those fuels are consumed varies hugely across sector. But in order to burn fossil fuels, you have to take them out of the ground. And it is actually a relatively small but powerful industry that facilitates that process. And when we're going to talk about the climate crisis, it is negligent, I would say, to talk about the climate crisis without talking about the fossil fuel industry. I think we all have a responsibility to name that when we engage in conversations around climate. So context setting done. Thank you, Tristram, for doing the heavy lifting. So what is fossil-free careers? What is the practicalities of it? What are we asking for? Why are we asking for it? Well, the campaign has 3 relatively straightforward demands, and they feed into one another. So the first is for UK university career services, although we're seeing this campaign being picked up across Europe, across North America, organically. The first is for university career services to refuse all new relationships, by which we mean recruitment relationships, with oil, gas, or mining companies. The second is to decline to renew any current relationships with oil, gas, or mining companies after the contractually obligated period ends. So we don't want this idea that, oh, we currently have some relationships we can't get out of to stall proactive policy commitments. which is something that we've seen in the past. So we wanted to make that explicit in the development of the campaign. And the third demand is around transparency. It's about the change mechanism. It's borrowed very heavily from the very successful divestment movement, which had ethical investment policies. We want to see UK universities, UK University Career Services specifically, adopt publicly available ethical careers policies that explicitly exclude oil, gas, and mining companies from recruitment opportunities. So we want to see universities lay out what criteria a third-party organization has to meet or not meet in order to make it through that screening process. And we've started to see a big uptick in that transparency since starting this campaign. It's definitely having an impact on the sector. So as I'm sure a lot of you are noticing, there's kind of two main focuses of this campaign. The first is it's in UK universities, and I appreciate not all of you are working in a university setting, but I think it has implications for educational career services across the board. And the second is that it primarily deals with the employer engagement function of a career service, not necessarily the advice given on a one-to-one basis with students. But as we work through this, I'm hoping you'll be able to see how it could influence other parts of careers practice as well. So why are we asking for these things? Well, as People and Planet, our starting point is a structural analysis. That's the kind of political lens we bring to the table when we develop our campaigns. It's what we encourage our students to do. So we're looking at how institutions and groups relate to each other. We are not looking at individual behavior change, which I think is something that Tristram picked up really well in his presentation. It's inadequate to deal with a structural crisis, so you need a structural analysis to bring to the table. And because we are a charity with a specific educational institution focus, our conclusion is that UK educational institutions are complicit in upholding systems of injustice. And if you take those 2 points of analysis seriously, then it demands of you to ask the question, how do we topple the pillars of support that educational institutions, of which career services are a part of, that they offer to those systems of injustice? And again, as somebody organizing in universities as a climate campaigner, that leads me to think of this concept of the fossil university. How are universities intertwined with corporate power surrounding fossil fuels in a way that impacts their operations? And I've already talked about investments, begun to talk a little bit about the recruitment pipeline, which I'll go on to expand on further, but also industry research partnerships, sponsorships of lecture halls, degree courses, scholarships, as well as honorary and executive positions held by fossil fuel industry figures within UK universities. So what is a recruitment pipeline, and why do I keep banging on about it? If you go to university and you study, let's say, geoengineering, and you go there with an absolute commitment to working for the oil industry, you will do so. Whether they are present on campus or not, you will go through that process with a degree that doesn't challenge that at all, and you will come out the other side and you will look for oil industry jobs. However, a lot of people go to UK universities with no intention of working for the fossil fuel industry and are then saturated with a presence of these industries on campus, at careers fairs, on jobs boards, at other recruitment events, drink and think sort of things. And in doing so, our universities, and particularly our careers services, have created recruitment pipelines from higher education, I think probably also from further education as well, into the industries most responsible for the climate crisis. So it's about the ways in which students are influenced by the presence of these companies on campus in ending up in a place that is bad for the environment, bad for social justice, bad for their own job prospects, as we'll go on to shortly. It's not about trying to individually pick off individuals who are committed in their mind to working for this industry and will go on to do so anyway, whether they're on campus or not. So 2 interesting quotes for you. First one is from Jeff Spath, who is the head of petroleum engineering at Texas A&M. And it's always interesting when the industry starts to say things for you. But there is a mentality out there that oil and gas is finished, that fossil fuels have become the villain of the climate crisis, that they're dead-end jobs that will have to be dramatically downsized in terms of industry size in order to meet legally binding climate commitments. So the fact that the industry is internally talking about this, I find very interesting. The second is between 2013 and 2017, the number of UK graduates going into oil and gas jobs fell by 61%. So you can see that with a declining recruitment base, the fossil fuel industry becomes increasingly reliant on those third-party relationships with educational career services, with other platforms like Handshake, to secure its future workforce. So what does this context mean for careers professionals? I'm presuming, given you're all at this webinar, that you would all agree we all have a responsibility to fight the climate crisis. It shouldn't be left to a small group of committed individuals. I don't think it should be left to government. I don't think it should be left to NGOs. I think it's something we all need to get our hands dirty with because it's going to affect us all. And as we established at the beginning, it's going to affect us all now, not just in the future. The second is fossil fuel companies are increasingly reliant on educational career service to secure the future of their workforce. You can draw that conclusion out of the statistics and the quotes I just presented. And within that context, in my opinion, careers professionals have disproportionate power to assist those corporate interests in maintaining a catastrophic business as usual status quo scenario, which is what we're currently seeing in the careers world, and therefore a disproportionate responsibility to withdraw that assistance. This is not a passive act. It is an active assistance of the industry when they are on our campuses, when they are on our jobs boards, when they are allowed to hold events with students with career service and university consent and branding and the social license that is offered to them. And I think this builds on something Tristram said in his presentation, where it's like, what does it even mean to be green? Green jobs, green careers fairs, these kind of positive actions have to be, and as well as, not an instead of, exclusions of the companies most responsible for environmental justice in the here and now. You cannot have a solar panel company and BP sit next to each other at a careers fair and go, oh, job done, we really did our bit there, guys. It is unreal that people think that is an option. So a word I know you'll all be familiar with, it's one I hear every day of my working life now, which is impartiality. And People on Planet has very consciously carved out a big area within this campaign to give recognition to the importance of impartiality within careers guidance, and for that not to conflict with the employer engagement services aspect of a career service, to take responsibility for the relationships it is holding with corporations and the way that it's facilitating their operations through access to students. It's always helpful when somebody else says something really powerful so that you don't have to say it yourself, which is, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. I think impartiality is being used as a straw man argument among a large number of career services in a way that's really acting as a get out of jail free card for huge levels of assistance being given to those corporate interests that are causing real world harm now. So to borrow a quote from our own action guide, which I'll encourage you all to read after this, it is not one or the other. Career services can remain impartial in the one-to-one guidance they give to students, whilst accepting a wider responsibility to sustainability that means they do not actively assist extractive industries in their recruitment when their operations are undeniably locking us into deadly and unjustifiable climate disaster. They say a picture paints 1,000 words, and I would agree with it. This is at Oxford, and this was this year, I believe, very start of this term. where the careers service during their kind of sustainability week put on a kind of a brainstorm, let's say, around careers and sustainability, careers and being green. And students took it into their own hands to make it very clear what their demands are, and have been for 2 years at this point. And each generation that comes through the university system, the school system, is more climate conscious than the last. Indisputably, I see it all the time. It's quite staggering how much they realize this is the defining issues of their lives. And there's a degree of which students don't want these kind of think tank exercises. They want concrete action now. And one of the ways that career services can do that is through implementing an ethical careers policy that explicitly excludes the corporations most responsible for environmental justice in the here and now. And we've started to see that change. 3 universities have now taken that action. I think more will be on the horizon very shortly. The precedent has been set, and now it's up for others to follow suit, to not do what some universities let themselves do with divestment, which is get way behind the pack and follow up years and years later with the bare minimum action around the climate crisis. And now I think the same call is on career services. It's been proven that it's possible. It's been proven that it's possible within impartiality, within ADCAS guidance. So I think the ball is now in the court of career services to step up to the plate. And one final question that might be on some of your lips is, what about those fossil fuel companies that are genuinely transitioning? This is a quote from the International Energy Agency, who is kind of the gold star for modeling climate scenarios. A 1.5 degree warming pathway means no new oil and gas fields approved for development and no new coal mines. So if that is the threshold, any company that owns fossil fuel reserves that have not yet been given the green light are outside a 1.5 degree pathway. And that is the vast majority of fossil fuel companies. And there are lists out there for companies to exclude from your portfolios, whether that's the Carbon Underground 200, whether that's the coal global exit list, whether that's the oil and gas global exit list. This is again being used as a straw man argument. Oh, well, what if large fossil fuel corporation is spending billions on renewables? Well, when that's 2% of its budget and 98% of it is being plowed into new fossil fuel extraction, they are still not genuinely transitioning. They might be adding in a bit on the side, but the climate doesn't care how many solar panels you have. It cares how many fossil fuels you burn. So what are the takeaways for careers professionals? The first is, at risk of sounding a bit like a Spider-Man movie, you have disproportionate power, and I think you have disproportionate responsibility to do something with that power. Positive actions like the promotion of green jobs must be an as well as, not an instead of, industry-wide exclusions. If you don't pick a side, students will pick it for you. If they see you as a barrier to climate action, they will treat you as such. We are now seeing this across the country, across the world. And I think as people who seek to have a productive conversation with students, you need to demonstrate that through action. And the final takeaway has to be that we all need to act now, and career services in particular. This can't happen in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years' time. It needs to happen now. The climate crisis is rapidly accelerating, and it's on all of us to do something about it. And I'm going to leave that there.
Thank you, Jay. I'd really love to spend some time on this now, but I'm conscious of the clock. The thing is that if you think career guidance is somehow just about supporting the status quo, then being impartial is a position somewhere in the middle of that status quo, that really isn't impartial at all, is it? Because the spectrum's not wide enough. If the spectrum includes social change and individual change at one end and the status quo at the other, then impartiality is quite a different point on that continuum. So yeah, if you're interested in that, Packer's Socio-Political Ideologies of Green Careers Education and Guidance, adapted from Tony Watts's work in 1996. That's a really good place to start. Yeah, so I'd love to carry on, but we need to press on. So what you said there about the pillars of support, I think will resonate with what Rita and Miriam are going to say to us about their work, which builds on Hartmut Rosa's ideas about aggression and acceleration. Am I right about that? Let's hand straight over to them and find out.
Thank you so much. I'll just find the slides here. Oh. Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, thank you so much. And yeah, it might be a little turn to another angle on this, but it all connects together. I see the connection anyway. But thank you so much for showing interest in our thoughts about career guidance, sustainability, and ethics. Together with other good co-workers in Denmark and Norway, we have published an anthology in November 22 with the title Career Guidance and Sustainability. The anthology is edited by me and Peter Plant, some of you might know, and besides Peter and Miriam and I, there are contributions from Buhl Poulsen and Randi Skovhus, Inger-Lise Lund Petersen, Rita Thomsen, Tristram Hooley, and Ronald Sultana, and from Norway, Roger Kjærgaard, Esben Robertson, Kari Tennefoss, and Ingrid Helene Haldorsen. Our presentation today will mainly draw upon our own articles, as Miriam's and mine. Yeah, a bit about us. I'm recently retired from 50 years of education and work life, mostly in the field of career guidance. Latest as associate professor at VIA University College in Aarhus in Denmark.
Yeah, and that's where we met. We used to be colleagues there, but we're still colleagues in a way. And I'm Miriam, and I work as a self-employed consultant and trusted advisor in my own company called Everything About Career, Alt om Karriere, as it's called in Danish. And I'm also an external lecturer at the Aarhus University, where I teach at the master's program in professional career guidance.
Yeah. So we've already had bits of an answer to why, but we would also like to start out with a why. Why an anthology on career guidance and sustainability? Sustainability is on the agenda everywhere, in policy, in schools, in educations, in private companies and public institutions, in fashion, in short, all over.
Yeah, and ideas have been launched about sustainability in the career guidance field ever since the 90s. So,
however, as we see it, in Denmark, sustainability has not been explicitly on the agenda in career guidance policy, theory, and practice.
But as we have looked into it, maybe it has been there always implicitly, because you could say that career guidance is about helping people making good life decisions and therefore also sustainable decisions. And career guidance is a profession that works with providing social architecture, social balance, social harmony in societies. And therefore we argue that sustainability probably has is a built-in ethics already in the career guidance profession.
But the field has not so far developed its practice, and somehow it seems controversial to ask practitioners why and how this should be done, and to use the concept of sustainability in connection with career guidance.
So with this anthology we hope to make the implicit more explicit.
Also, in fact, we will ask you today, is it so that sustainability can be equated with ethics in career guidance? Yeah, so my contribution is the opening article with the title Career Guidance and Sustainability Between the Need for Resonance and a Compulsion to Acceleration. My preoccupation in the article has been a sociological one, and in a sense, an ontological view on sustainability and career guidance. Those of you who have shown interest in the German sociologist Hartmut Rosa will recognize the concept resonance and acceleration in the title of my article. According to Hartmut Rosa, we must understand sustainability in the stream of history. If we learn and experience that we are connected to generations before us and after us, we will not think of sustainability as a restriction, but as an element in a successful life. What we can learn from this is to help to de-individualize structural problems that disconnect us from one another. This we shall do in order to strengthen a we that connects us to the nature and to another and to one another. Here my reference is Richard Sennett, who is probably known by most of you. A main point is that the Western societies are based on accelerating growth as a dominant value and idea. We could name these societies acceleration society. Some of the challenges of the acceleration societies are that permanent growth paradigm forces aggression onto all living. For example, aggression against nature means that you constantly have to be able to master and dominate to force out resources. We just heard a bit about it. Aggression in social relationships because other people are constantly seen as competitors and in one long competition. And aggression against ourselves as individuals because we are encouraged and expected to optimize ourselves constantly. The constant aggression silenced the resonance in the world between human beings and between humans and nature. You cannot hear the other one or the nature call, and so you stop calling or stop getting the experience of being called. The constant warfare on all levels, well, it will be the end of it all because neither nature nor human beings can continue the never-ending story of growth. It is not a sustainable idea and value. So, what are the possible and very realistic consequences? And what are the career guidance potential in terms of these consequences? Let's take a brief look at Rosa's concept of resonance. You can describe it from two perspectives, from the outside and in, and from inside out. Rosa talks about resonance as a basic need for human beings. A basic need for affection means an experience of being touched in relation to the other one or the nature. To have a feeling to be called upon. And a basic need for emotion means a faith or confidence that when you call out to the world, you will be heard. Loss of resonance leads to alienation, which is shown in symptoms as, for example, depression, anxiety, and burnout. Symptoms that we very often connect to the individual and name as special vulnerability. But how can this alienation help us in career guidance? First of all, as a recognition of alienation as a structural and not a personal problem, and resonance as a key. A Danish sociologist called Rasmus Willig and a Norwegian philosopher called Arne Vetlesen has written about being trapped in non-sustainable structures in the neoliberal society where acceleration growth is the norm. Ways out of this trap, they say, is practical solutions on abstract problems. I would say that we must be aware as practitioners of the otherness of resonance, which is alienation, and help people to understand the symptoms such as anxiety, depression, and burnout, not as something wrong with them, but something wrong with the way we create structures in communities with growth as dominant value. We are trapped in structures in Western societies, which Rosa defined as dynamic stability, conditions that are not sustainable, but pure aggression toward the nature, each other, and oneself. A possible way to go is, according to Rosa, medium-passive Weltverhältnisse. Or we could also talk about less aggression in life and downsizing. Metaphorically, he says, it is all about to live in a smaller room with fewer relations and with the 3 books that I love. I kind of love that image, really. So let's hear more about sustainability in connection with career guidance from the contribution that you made, Miriam.
Thank you. And I enjoyed hearing you speaking German as well.
Thank you.
Yes, my contribution to the anthology is I've made 2 articles where I look into 2 different concepts, the calling and the hope. And thereby I'm probably revealing my academic background in comparative religion and cultural studies. But this has actually been my pathway to the field of career guidance, seeing the labor market and also the profession of career guidance through actually the phenomenology of religion, but also through critique of religion. And maybe you get a bit of a flavor of that when you see my next slide. So, the title of my first contribution is "A Calling to Save the World: Potentials and Challenges in relation to." I'm just going to move you. What did I write here? In relation to the calling, career, and sustainability. So I'm actually in this article doing a bit of a church historical account in the article, where I explore how the calling has played a part in our working lives in religious offices, like with clergy, monks, nuns, to seeing work or vocation as something contributing to something valuable, to a higher meaning, to a goal outside ourselves. Which can be resonance, as Rita talked about, but it can also be the opposite. A calling is usually valued as a positive, and also in career guidance research, where I've looked into the research of Dick and Duffy, American researchers in the career guidance field, and they define calling as a transcendent summoning that is calling the individual to perform meaningful tasks in their careers. And a transcendent summoning here can mean a deity, a spiritual force, but it can also mean an ideology, because ideologies are transgressing the individual. And their research show that experiencing, feeling a calling adds a higher quality of life, and it builds more meaningful lives according to their respondents. But what I've looked into here is that I find that there's a lack of criticism in their research towards whose voice you're actually hearing. Is it, for instance, a boss in the hospital who tells the stressed, underpaid nurse to suck it up and work more shifts because she chose a profession to help people? Or is it Putin summoning you to fight for Mother Russia? So who is in fact calling, and how can we help people in career guidance to reflect on the voice you're hearing? Is it resonance, or is it in fact alienation, abuse, stress, exceedance of individual boundaries, transgression, loss of autonomy, or even submission to an evil ideology? So here I'm proposing for the career guidance profession a practical ethics and an ideological ethics. And first, the practical ethics here. Because sustainability is an ideology, it is a transcendent summoning, you could say. So how can we contribute to an important goal outside ourselves in sustainable ways? How can we help individuals in being aware of exploitation and not contributing to unwanted scenarios in the name of an ideology? For instance, if we use the Sustainable Development Goal number 8 about decent work, how can we help people actually unravel, is their work actually a decent work? And here I'm proposing an ideological ethics as well, because we need to always be questioning ideology. Ideologies are glasses. Then they enable a particular worldview, but they are also in that ruling out other stuff. And what are we not seeing? Whose voice is in fact calling? Yeah, that was about the calling, and here I'm going for the hope for the hopeless, sustainable career guidance, and vocational hope is the title of my other article. So I begin this article with looking into international research that shows that young people are at risk of losing hope for a sustainable future. And you can say that when young people are at risk, we career guidance practitioners, we put on a superhero cape and step into a career guidance mobile, and because this has always been a main task for career guidance, actually an ethical obligation for the profession to help young people at risk. So in this article, I looked into the concept of vocational hope, which is an important component in career goal setting when you ask the people around the SCCT framework. And here, Stephen D. Brown is the one I'm referring to, who's done a bit on vocational hope. And he defines vocational hope as a positive emotional and motivational state associated with envisioning a future in which satisfying and meaningful work is attainable. So if young people cannot envision a future in which satisfying and meaningful work is attainable, you only see catastrophe. Well, you lose motivation and thereby also agency. So what I'm working with in this article is that I think we could help the hopeless, the people without hope, by providing them with concrete career pathways that actually contribute to create sustainable futures through work, which hopefully could lead to an experience of agency and then hope and motivation. And I actually think we're looking at a door opener here for sustainable career guidance practice. We need to work with developing vocational hope in career guidance practice. And this concept here of vocational hope, I think, could also be a very interesting parameter to look into in terms of research. This is a place where we really see a very clear connection between sustainability and career guidance, so we have discussed. In Denmark, there are a lot of young people suffering from climate anxiety, and they seek therapeutic help, which is of course one measure. But vocational hope is not necessarily strengthened by therapeutical measures. It must be accompanied by methods that support agency and explore career pathways to sustainable, hopeful, and valued futures. So I have tried to develop a very concrete framework for developing vocational hope. And here you see 3 steps to plan and design your career guidance course or activities or career guidance process, for instance, in schools. And I call it imagining the world, learning about the world, and changing the world. Imagining the world is a career guidance practice where you're working with creative inventions, imagining and thereby inventing sustainable futures. And here I'm using or drawing upon the framework of positive uncertainty, which I think most of you are familiar with. The second step here, learning about the world, is a career guidance practice, a career education practice, actually, working with career learning, exploring which skills and professions we are in need of in order to accomplish creating sustainable futures. And this is a practice inspired by Buhl. And the third step here, changing the world, a career guidance practice working with connecting the individual career paths and also career paths of the group you're working with to goals outside themselves or ourselves in the world, and concretely figuring out how to keep improving, changing the planet through our career choices, linking the career choice to goals outside ourselves, the world. And this is a practice drawing on a collective and norm-critical career guidance practice inspired by Tristram, Hooley, and Rita as well. So this is all from Team Denmark right now.
Team Denmark, yes.
Thank you ever so much, Team Denmark. I never take it for granted that how lucky we are that you'll speak English to us, and so I said I'm very grateful, and I look forward to an English edition of this new book that I think will be really useful to us. You raised so many issues there. I think about making implicit things explicit. I think we need to do that in our ethical codes of practice. I noticed the IABG ethical guidance is explicit, but I don't think, apologies to CDI, I don't think the CDI one is. I think that could be looked at. I think it's really interesting as well to think about the generations before and after us. The Nigel Warburton, the philosopher, talking about utilitarianism, raised the issue of, well, if you ask people now what is the greatest good of the greatest number, they might still persist in our current approach to economic activity. But what about the generations that aren't born yet? The greatest good of the greatest number in the future? Yeah, we do need to make the move to a green and sustainable economy. It's very interesting too about how young people, but also people in the middle of their careers and older people, are feeling about the sustainability and climate change and the environment. There's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of alienation, and it's really for us in the careers field to respond to that. And thank you for mentioning some of the people who've done work on models and theory approaches to hope. I'm quite also interested in what's happening in Canada with people like Norm Amundsen, Niles Spencer and Gary Ponel, because they're looking at hope-centered approaches. I think those we need to come back to. We've got probably about 15 minutes for discussion, and then we'll have a 5-minute wrap up at the end. So apologies that there won't be much time to have a plenary, but I will just try and sum up the seminar in the last 5 minutes. So if we go into discussion groups now, please have a free rein and talk about the issues that are really important to you. But if you need a guide to some questions, we put them at the beginning of the chat. You can have another look at that. Hi everybody. Hi everybody, welcome back. We've got 5 minutes, so this is a hugely important issue, and I hope it's made a contribution to tonight's seminar has made a contribution to our collective thinking about how our sector can be proactive and a leading player in the green transformation of the economy and society, and linking those issues of sustainability to social justice, because they are linked. There are there's some evidence, for example, that here in the UK, it's London and the southeast that are getting the high-skilled green jobs, and areas like the northeast that are missing out. So there's some really big issues here. And I hope you'll continue to debate these issues on training courses, the social media sites you're on, and sites such as Career Guidance for Social Justice. But more importantly, it feeding through into your own practice. As one of the pioneers of green career guidance, Peter Plant has written recently, guidance must become part of the solution rather than the problem. So making our contribution towards green changes, green career development, and a sustainable future, this is the new paradigm, he said. So ethical practices raise many dilemmas and challenges. You have your own ethical standpoint. Your clients, the students, the adults that you're helping have got their viewpoints as well. The employer that you might be working for, the wider policy context in which you work. These set up all sorts of tensions, and they're really difficult to manage. But clearly, anxiety and anger and alienation are the things that we have to fight. And if we really are to reach the UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 or net zero by 2050, we have to have concrete plans. So I'll pause there. I think one other thing I just quickly mention is the shortage of really good green LMI. We don't have a good way yet of gathering the data and collecting the statistics. The PwC Green Careers Barometer is pretty good, but that isn't for younger people. I went on BBC Bite Size to see what they said on green careers, and they had half a dozen case studies, and they had a quiz, 8 questions. So one of the questions was, what's your favourite food? I said fish and chips, and they said, hooray, your ideal job is marine conservationist. We mustn't trivialize green careers issues. I mean, it's a nice joke, but honestly, we should be doing better on that. Now, we had this seminar so that we could say thank you to Lyn Barham for all that she has done over the years to promote this agenda. And for those of you who may not be familiar with it, I'll just say briefly a few words about it. Back in 2007, Lyn persuaded Jonathan Porritt, whose campaigner many of you will have heard of, to write an article for the Careers Journal, Career Guidance Today. And looking back at it, I'm struck now by that year being an era of hope and optimism. We had a very strong Sustainable Development Commission, and we had a minister, Hilary Benn, who was really committed to the agenda. But then we had the global financial crisis and everything that followed in British politics, and it's fallen apart. And it didn't stop Lyn persuading me to work with her and do a seminar back in 2008. Do you remember that, Lyn? On career development for sustainable lives. And bless her, Lyn, you've been, even as late as last month, you wrote a fabulous briefing. It's on the CDI website, professional resources website, on going green and how to do it ethically. So thank you very much for everything you've done over the years, and we wish you all the best in. Now, you say you live in northeast Somerset. That's quite near Bath, isn't it? And Bath turns out to be one of the greenest, well, the greenest city in the UK. So I'm sure you will contribute to Bath keeping its position. So thank you ever so much, Lyn, for all you've done. And thank you to everyone for participating, for your contributions, and a special thanks to our speakers. And as I said, we'll put the recording on the website with some notes. Please, get in touch if you want to ask any further questions of our speakers, or you can direct them to me or Claire Nix at NICEC. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy your rest of your evening.
Good timing, Anthony.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.